It was a cool evening in Detroit, and the sky above the city was starting to turn orange as the sun went down. The streets around the arena were buzzing with excitement. People were lining up, holding tickets, wearing tour merch, and taking pictures in front of banners that read Drake Live in Detroit. It was going to be one of the biggest nights of the tour. Inside the arena, the crew was making final checks. Lights were flashing across the empty seats, sound engineers were testing the speakers, and dancers were practicing their moves one last time. Drake was in his dressing room, calm and focused. He had done this hundreds of times before, but something about tonight felt a little different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. He stepped out on stage for the sound check, moving around and checking the mic. His voice echoed through the huge space, bouncing off the walls. Everything was working perfectly. His team nodded, giving him the signal that all was set. He smiled and walked back toward the green room to rest before the show began. Just as he sat down on the couch, his phone buzzed. It wasn't one of his usual contacts. The number wasn't saved, and it didn't look familiar. For a second, he thought about ignoring it, but something made him stop. Maybe it was the area code. Maybe it was just a gut feeling. Without thinking much, he answered. "Hello," he said. On the other end, there was a pause. Then a calm voice said, "What's up?" Drake froze for a moment. It was a voice he knew well. It was Eminem. Drake sat up straight, surprised. They hadn't talked in a long time, not directly. M sounded cool, relaxed. They exchanged a few lines of small talk. Nothing deep, just a casual check-in. But Drake could tell this wasn't just a friendly call. M had a reason for reaching out, and it was clear he was building up to it. Then the topic changed. M asked about the show, about who Drake planned to bring on stage tonight. Drake was quiet for a second. He hadn't told many people about it. Maybe just his inner circle. M's voice stayed calm, but his words were sharp. "I heard some things," he said. "We should talk." That was all it took for the mood to shift. Drake looked around the room, suddenly feeling the weight of the call. Whatever this was about, it wasn't light. His team knocked on the door, reminding him there were only 2 hours until showtime. Drake nodded but didn't speak. He was still on the phone, listening closely. Outside, fans were still pouring into the arena. The air was filled with excitement and music. No one had any idea that behind the scenes, something unexpected was unfolding, something that might change the night completely. Drake held the phone to his ear, listening carefully as Eminem spoke. The words were calm, but there was something beneath them, something serious that Drake couldn't ignore. He leaned back in his chair, trying to focus. The usual buzz of excitement in the arena seemed far away now, and everything around him felt a little quieter, a little more distant. He couldn't shake the feeling that this phone call was important. Eminem's voice continued on the other end of the line. "I don't know what you're planning, but you might want to think twice," he said. The warning was clear. There was no anger in Eminem's tone, but there didn't need to be. The way he spoke carried weight, and Drake could feel it. "What do you mean?" Drake asked, his mind racing. Was it something about the show tonight? Was it about the special guest he planned to bring on stage? Eminem's words were vague, but it was clear that whatever he was hinting at was something Drake needed to pay attention to. There was a long pause on the phone, and for a moment, Drake wondered if Eminem was going to hang up. The tension between the two was growing, and he wasn't sure where the conversation was headed. "Let's just say, Detroit's different," Eminem finally said. "You're here, I'm here, and we both know what that means." Drake could feel his heart beat a little faster. He knew that Eminem was no stranger to controversy, but this wasn't about that. This was something bigger. Detroit was Eminem's home, his city, and everyone knew how much the rapper meant to the people there. It wasn't just about music, it was about respect, and Eminem was making sure Drake understood that. The words hung in the air. Drake had always admired Eminem, but this was something else. It wasn't just a call between two artists. It was a reminder of the power that came with being in the same place at the same time. Drake had made a name for himself in the music world, but he wasn't immune to the rules that governed the industry, especially when it came to certain places, certain people. "I'm not saying you can't do what you want," Eminem continued, "but you need to know that some things don't fly around here." Drake felt his stomach tighten. What exactly was Eminem talking about? His mind started to race through the possible scenarios. Had he crossed a line? Was it something about the guest he planned to bring on stage? Or was it something even more serious that he hadn't even thought of? Okay, Drake said slowly, trying to stay calm. I'll think about it. Good, Eminem replied. Just make sure you think it through. This isn't just a normal show. It's Detroit. Drake hung up the phone, feeling the weight of Eminem's words. The energy in the room shifted. The excitement that had once filled the space now seemed a little more distant. His team, who had been waiting outside the door, entered with questions in their eyes. But Drake didn't have the answers yet. As he stood up from his chair, the sound of the crowd outside grew louder. Fans were cheering, waiting for the show to start. But in that moment, all Drake could think about was the call he had just received. Something was about to change, and he wasn't sure what it would be. Drake stood in the center of his dressing room, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the table. The phone call from Eminem kept playing over and over in his mind. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, seeing a man who had done countless shows, stood before thousands of fans, and never once hesitated. But tonight felt different. His team was getting ready in the next room, making final adjustments. Someone knocked on the door and peeked in. Everything good, Drake? The voice was soft, concerned. It was his tour manager, who'd been with him through every performance. Drake didn't answer right away. He just stared out of the window, watching the last of the daylight fade behind the tall buildings of Detroit. He had always felt a connection to this city. It was the place where so many artists, including Eminem, had started their careers. The respect for the city ran deep, and tonight it felt like he was standing at the center of something bigger than just a concert. Yeah, Drake finally said, turning to face his manager. Everything's good. But the truth was, nothing felt good. He couldn't shake the weight of what Eminem had said. Detroit wasn't just another city, it was Eminem's city. And it was clear that M wasn't playing around when it came to protecting what was his. Drake had always believed in his ability to read the room, to handle tough situations, but this was different. Eminem wasn't just warning him, he was telling him, in his own way, to respect the boundaries of this place. The show was still hours away, and the buzz outside the arena was growing. The sound of fans chanting his name echoed through the halls, but Drake's mind wasn't on the crowd. He was thinking about the stage, the performance, and whether he should go ahead with his original plan or listen to Eminem's advice. His phone buzzed again, breaking his thoughts. This time, it was a message from one of his team members, asking if everything was still on track. He stared at the screen for a moment, his finger hovering over the keyboard. What was he going to say? How could he explain the tension he was feeling when no one else in the room understood? He let out a deep breath and replied, "Yeah, it's all good. Just making sure everything's in order." But the truth was, nothing felt in order. Everything fell off. He looked down at his watch, realizing it was almost time to head to the stage. He had to make a decision. But there was something inside of him telling him to slow down, to think carefully before stepping out there in front of thousands of fans. He didn't want to make the wrong choice. As he walked toward the stage door, the noise from the crowd seemed to get louder. The lights flashed, and the excitement was palpable. Drake could hear the distant chants of his name, the energy building outside. But inside, he was standing still, caught between two worlds, the stage he had worked so hard to get to, and the warning he had just received from Eminem. Drake's hand rested on the door handle, his mind racing. He took one last look around the room before stepping into the unknown. Drake walked out of his dressing room, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. The arena was still, but the energy outside was building. He could hear the faint sound of the crowd from behind the thick walls, their excitement growing by the minute. His team was already gathered near the stage entrance, going over last-minute details. But Drake couldn't focus on any of it. His mind kept going back to the phone call with Eminem. As he passed through the backstage area, Drake noticed how everyone was moving with a sense of urgency. Dancers were getting into their costumes, stagehands were adjusting lights, and technicians were double-checking sound equipment. Yet there was an unusual tension in the air. It wasn't the normal pre-show buzz. Something felt off. "Yo, Drake, you good?" One of his backup dancers called out from across the room. She noticed the serious look on his face and walked over. "You seem a little distant tonight." Drake forced a smile, trying to shake off the feeling that was creeping up on him. Yeah, just a lot on my mind, you know? She nodded, sensing that he wasn't being fully honest. It's cool, we got your back out there. Everything's gonna be fine. But her words didn't bring him much comfort. There was something else happening tonight, something that went beyond the usual stress before a big show. Drake felt it in the pit of his stomach, the weight of the decision he was about to make. He moved past his dancers and headed toward the stage area, but as he did, he overheard a quiet conversation between a couple of his roadies. Their voices were low, but they didn't think anyone was listening. Did you hear? One of them said. Word is Drake might pull something big tonight. They're saying he's gonna bring someone out with him on stage. Someone big? The second roadie asked, raising an eyebrow. Like who? The first roadie lowered his voice even more, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. Rumor is he's thinking about bringing out a surprise guest, someone controversial. Drake froze in his tracks. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't told anyone about the special guest he had in mind for tonight's performance, and hearing that his plans were already being whispered about backstage made him uneasy. He turned the corner to the stage entrance, but before he could step through the door, his manager appeared beside him. Drake, his manager said, his voice low and serious, we need to talk. It's about the guest. Drake's eyes narrowed, and he felt his nerves tighten. What about the guest? Look, I know you've got something big planned, but there's some tension in the air, his manager explained. It's spreading backstage. We're getting word that people are worried about what's going to happen. Drake stared at him, feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. Eminem said the same thing, he admitted. He warned me about the show tonight, but I don't understand why it's such a big deal. His manager sighed, looking around cautiously. It's Detroit. M-City. You've got to understand the weight of what you're planning. If we go ahead with this, things might get a lot more complicated than we're ready for. The tension in Drake's shoulders grew. He knew his manager was right. This wasn't just a normal performance. The whole city was watching, and the stakes felt higher than ever. Just give me a minute, Drake said, holding up his hand. I need to think. His manager nodded and stepped back, allowing Drake to process everything on his own. Drake stood at the edge of the stage, looking out at the crowd that was growing louder by the second. He was about to step into the spotlight, but the weight of his choices hung over him like a cloud. The noise from the crowd outside the arena grew louder, almost vibrating through the walls. Drake stood at the edge of the stage, staring out at the sea of people. The excitement in the air was undeniable, but the pressure on him was even stronger. His mind was racing, torn between his instincts and the warning he had received from Eminem. He could hear his team talking in the background, but their voices felt distant. All he could focus on was the weight of the decision he had to make. The crowd wanted the show to go on. They were there to see him, to hear his music, to be a part of something special. But tonight, there was something more at stake. It wasn't just about the performance anymore. It was about respect. Respect for the city, respect for the people who built their careers here, and respect for the warning Eminem had given him. Drake took a deep breath and ran his fingers through his hair. Everything he had worked for in this industry, everything he had built, had led him to this point. But at that moment, none of it seemed to matter. What mattered was whether he would listen to Eminem, to the history of Detroit, or whether he would go ahead with his plan and risk causing a storm. His manager appeared at his side again, looking tense. Drake, we're almost ready. The crowd is waiting. Drake nodded but didn't respond right away. He turned away from the stage entrance, walking a few steps toward the quieter part of the backstage area. His manager followed, sensing that Drake needed a moment alone. What are you thinking? His manager asked, voice soft but urgent. I don't know, Drake replied. I don't know if it's the right move anymore. I thought it would be a surprise, something big for the fans. But now it feels like I might be stepping on something I don't fully understand. His manager paused, letting the silence hang between them for a moment. Detroit's Eminem City, he said slowly. And whatever you decide, you've got to show respect for that. If you go through with this, there could be consequences, serious ones. Drake's mind went back to the phone call, to Eminem's calm voice and the weight of his words. Detroit wasn't just a stop on a tour. It was the heart of Eminem's legacy, and right now, it felt like a line was being drawn in the sand. I never meant to cause any drama, Drake said, his voice quieter now. I just thought the fans would love it. They will, his manager said, but the right way and the right time. Drake rubbed his face with both hands, exhaustion taking over. He didn't have all the answers, and right now, he wasn't sure what the right move was. The show was still going to happen. There was no turning back from that, but the special moment he had planned was now in question. After a long pause, Drake finally spoke. Let's call it off. I don't want to risk it. Not tonight. His manager gave him a small nod of approval, as though he had been expecting that answer all along. Good choice. You'll still give them an amazing show. Trust me. With that, Drake turned back toward the stage. The decision had been made. The fans would still get what they came for, but tonight, the tension of the unknown would remain behind the curtain. The spotlight was still his, but the shadow of the city's history lingered, reminding him that some things were bigger than the show. Drake took a deep breath as he stood backstage, trying to calm his racing thoughts. The decision had been made to cancel the surprise guest, but the weight of it still lingered. He knew the fans outside would be disappointed, but deep down, he felt like it was the right thing to do. There was something about the tension in the air that felt too heavy to ignore. The phone call from Eminem had made him realize that tonight wasn't just about putting on a good show. It was about understanding the unspoken rules of the industry, especially when it came to Detroit. It wasn't long before one of Drake's close team members walked up to him, holding a phone. "You need to hear this," the person said. "It's about the call." Drake hesitated for a moment but then took the phone. His curiosity piqued. It was a conversation he had been avoiding, but now it seemed inevitable. As soon as he picked up, he heard Eminem's voice again, just as calm as before, but with an edge that Drake hadn't noticed the first time. "So you made the call," Eminem said, his tone steady. "You decided to play it safe." Drake nodded even though Eminem couldn't see him. "Yeah, I did. I thought about what you said, about Detroit." There was a short pause on the other end. Drake could almost hear Eminem thinking. "Good. I'm not trying to control what you do," Eminem continued. "But you need to understand something about this city. It's more than just a place to perform. It's where I came from, where I fought to be heard. And when you step on that stage, it's not just your show. It's a shared moment. You've got to respect that." Drake sat down in his dressing room, the weight of Eminem's words sinking in. He had always respected Eminem's talent, his drive, and his authenticity, but he had never fully understood the connection between the rapper and the city of Detroit. It wasn't just a hometown pride. It was a sense of ownership, of history, and of loyalty to those who had helped shape it. "I didn't mean to step on anyone's toes," Drake said quietly. "I just wanted to give the fans something they remember." "I get that," Eminem responded. "I'm not saying what you wanted to do was wrong, but Detroit's a place where you have to earn that respect. It's not given freely, and sometimes the timing's got to be right. You can't just do things because you can." Drake nodded, feeling a deep sense of understanding now. It wasn't just about the show or the fans. It was about knowing the history, knowing the culture, and knowing when to hold back, even when you're at the top of your game. "Thanks, Em," Drake said, his voice steady now. "I needed to hear that." "Anytime," Eminem replied. "Just don't forget where you are. Detroit's different, and the people here don't forget." As Drake hung up the phone, he sat in silence for a moment, processing everything. Eminem's words had opened his eyes to a deeper level of respect for not just the city, but for the culture that shaped him and so many others. He was a part of that now, too. The crowd outside was still waiting, their energy growing with every passing second. Drake took one last look at the stage, feeling more prepared than ever to step out and give them the best performance he could. But tonight, it wasn't just about the music. It was about understanding the legacy he was a part of. The crowd outside was growing louder with every passing minute, their excitement building as the time for Drake's performance drew closer. Backstage, Drake stood in front of the mirror, his reflection staring back at him. His nerves had started to settle, but there was still a heavy weight on his shoulders. The decision to cancel the surprise guest had been the right one. But now he had to go out there and prove that the show could still be just as powerful without it. His team was buzzing around him, finalizing everything. The lights were checked, the sound system was in place, and the dancers were ready. But no matter how many times Drake had walked out onto that stage, it never got any easier. The anticipation in the air was always the same, whether it was his first show or his 100th. Tonight, though, felt different. There was an energy in the room that he couldn't shake. It wasn't the usual excitement, it was something deeper, something that made him more aware of the responsibility he held. As he looked around the backstage area, Drake noticed the staff working with quiet intensity, each person focused on their part in the performance. He saw his backup dancers practicing their moves, their faces determined but relaxed. His tour manager was nearby, going over final details with the sound crew. Everything was moving as planned, but Drake couldn't help but feel a little disconnected from it all. The pressure wasn't just about putting on a great show. It was about showing respect to the place that had shaped Eminem, the place that had shaped so many. The door to the stage opened slightly, and one of the roadies peeked in. "Drake, they're ready for you," he said with a smile, though there was a hint of tension in his voice. "The crowd's been chanting your name for the last 10 minutes. Drake nodded, a quiet smile crossing his face. "I'm ready," he replied, even though he didn't feel entirely sure. He walked toward the stage entrance, his feet heavy with each step. The noise from the crowd grew louder, vibrating through the walls and into his chest. He could hear the excitement, the anticipation, but he still felt the weight of the city on his shoulders. This wasn't just about performing, it was about doing it right. He had learned that much tonight. As he stepped onto the stage, the bright lights hit him immediately, blinding him for a moment. The roar of the crowd was deafening, and for a second, he felt like he might lose himself in the noise. But then he took a deep breath, grounded himself, and focused. The music started, and the crowd's energy seemed to sync with the beat. He could feel their excitement, their hunger for the performance. Drake moved into the first verse, his voice strong and confident. As he sang, he could see the faces in the front row, all of them reaching out, singing along, and reacting to every word he said. The energy was electric, and for the first time that night, Drake felt fully in the moment. He wasn't thinking about the surprise guest, the warning from Eminem, or the pressure of the decision. He was just performing, just living in the music, and that was enough. The crowd was everything he needed. Their cheers and chants filled the space around him, lifting him higher with each passing song. He knew that despite everything, despite the tension and uncertainty leading up to this moment, he had made the right choice. The show was his, and tonight it was all about the music. The show was in full swing, and the energy in the arena was electric. Drake had found his rhythm, and the crowd had fallen into it with him. The tension that had plagued him backstage seemed to dissolve as the music flowed. Each song connected with the audience, and with every beat, the crowd cheered louder. He could feel the connection, the unity between himself and the fans, and it made him forget everything else. The lights above him flickered in sync with the music, casting shifting shadows across the stage. Dancers moved around him, their movements sharp and fluid, adding to the spectacle. Drake had always prided himself on putting on a show, not just a performance. Every detail, every moment was carefully crafted to create something memorable. Tonight, though, it felt like he was letting go of the control he usually held so tightly. The night had started with uncertainty, but now it was a different story. As he performed, he realized how much he respected the space he was in, not just as an artist, but as a guest in a city that had helped shape so many careers, including his own. He understood the weight of the history surrounding Detroit, especially when it came to Eminem. But he also knew that he had earned his place on that stage, not just as a performer, but as someone who had put in the work, the effort, and the dedication to get there. Midway through the set, Drake paused for a moment, his breath steady from the intense performance. The lights dimmed for just a second, and a quiet hush fell over the crowd. Drake stood still, letting the silence stretch for a brief moment before he spoke. "Detroit," he said, his voice clear and strong. "This place means something special to me. Tonight, we're not just putting on a show, we're making a memory." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Drake could feel the love from the fans flooding toward him. The tension he had felt earlier, the hesitation and the doubt, were gone. He was exactly where he needed to be. As the show went on, each song felt like a celebration, not just of his career, but of the culture that had shaped it. He wasn't thinking about the decisions he had made earlier or the risks he had taken. All that mattered was the music, the connection to the fans, and the respect he had for the city that had welcomed him. When the final song came, Drake stood at the front of the stage, arms raised in triumph. The crowd was singing along with him, their voices echoing throughout the arena. The music slowed, and as the last notes played, Drake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night lift off his shoulders. The show had been a success, not because of the surprises or the drama, but because it was real, it was honest, and it was for the fans who had been with him every step of the way. As the lights began to fade, the crowd's cheers grew even louder, and Drake smiled to himself. Tonight had been a reminder that sometimes the best performances aren't the ones filled with surprises. They're the ones where you show up, give everything you have, and let the moment speak for itself. And with that, the curtain fell,